All right, guys, welcome back. We're going to go into our third lesson in this particular module. What we're going to talk about in this case are device templates. What are the different configuration elements in a device? What are the system configuration parameters that we're going to see? How do we identify transport and service VPN parameters? How do we actually go in and create the device template? And then how do we configure the transport and management VPN parameters in a device template? And then finally, we'll wrap up this lesson by talking about how we configure the service VPN parameters in the device template. Now, as we mentioned before, a device template are basically those specific to WEdge devices, WEdge models, right? But it can also be possible to create multiple device templates for the same model of device. It just depends on the location of the function within their network. Each device template can contain multiple feature templates, like we said. The device template itself cannot be shared between different WEdge models because some of the features might not apply to each of those models, but feature templates can be shared across different models. So device templates are specific to a specific WEdge model. We can only apply one device template per device, but those device templates can reference multiple feature templates. All right? And we talked about that, the basic information feature templates and the transport management VPN templates, service VPN, and so on. What we're looking in this diagram here is kind of an overall view, if you will, of the device template components. A device template is made up of 4 templates that are grouped into different sections. You have your basic information, which includes system information, logging information, AAA, OMP, bidirectional forwarding detection, security elements, NTP features, and so on. Kind of what we talked about with those basic feature templates that we saw previously. Then we have the transport and management VPN templates, which include the templates that are used to configure VPN 0 and VPN 512. It also includes things like BGP, OSPF, the VPN interfaces, VPN interface cellular, VPN interface GRE, and also the VPN interface PPP feature templates, which we're going to take a look at a little bit later on. We also see the service VPN. That includes the templates that are used to configure the service VPNs, which contain also elements of BGP, IGMP, multicast, OSPF, protocol-independent multicast, VPN interfaces, VPN interface bridges, GRE, IPsec, NATpool, and other DHCP feature-related feature templates. All right, now if you recall, the VPN 0, well, we have 2 different basic types of VPNs that exist within our architecture. Our transport VPNs, which are used to carry actual data traffic, and our management VPNs, which are used to manage the overlay. And that includes things like VPN 0 and VPN 512. So the service VPNs are going to be any of those instances where we have interfaces assigned to these VPNs that are not 0 and 512 respectively. And we can see that we have interfaces and maybe routing elements that are going to be configured to those as well. The management VPN, VPN 512, and then finally our policy. All right, now there are some feature templates that we have, right? The system feature template we talked about in the last lesson in quite a bit of detail, the logging feature template that we talked about. We didn't really spend a whole lot of time talking about the AAA feature template, but that allows us to specify things like authentication methods and orders of authentication, which might include radius or TACX, or maybe local authentication, maybe local user groups with different read-write permissions and so on. We talked about the BFD template. We talked about the OMP template. We also talked about the security template to change our control plane security properties for things like DTLS and TLS, and to change our IPsec properties for our transport VPNs. The archive template allows a running configuration to be copied to a file server within specific periods. NTP, the network time protocol, and if we want to set up properties of NTP like authentication and so on. The VPN template, where we can change things like DNS information. How do we advertise the protocols, right? How do we change the ECMP hash that we're using for the equal cost multipath load balancing calculations? BGP template would include all the properties that might apply to BGP, which would be the autonomous system number, the router ID, the administrative distance, maximum paths, the neighbors, redistribution of whatever protocols we might have into BGP, the hold time values, the keep alive timers, and so on. For OSPF, we can also set up things like router ID, administrative distance for different types of routes. We can set up our areas. We can set up our OSPF interfaces, modify that reference bandwidth that's used in the metric calculation, originate routes with default information originate. We can also modify things like metrics, metric type. So for example, is it an OE1 route or an OE2 route if we're injecting external routes, the shortest path first timers that we use. VPN interface configuration is going to include things like V4 and V6 information, addressing, DHCP helper, a network address translation if we're doing something like virtual routing, like VRRP, traffic shaping, QoS, inbound and outbound access control lists, policing, if we're doing static ARP entries, 802.1x configurations, things like speed and duplex, MAC address information, MTU information. We can also specify TCP maximum segment size. We can do TLOC extensions. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things actually in the VPN interface configuration that we can apply. We'll take a look at some of these in more detail as we go through the process here. All right, we also have a VPN interface bridge to configure like the layer 3 characteristics of a bridge interface. That would include things like the V4 address, the DHCP helper address, MTU, TCP, MSS, and so on. If we want to configure DHCP server properties, we can do that as well. Sorry about that. We can set up SNMP, routing protocol templates for BGP, OSPF, VPN interfaces, and so on. So we have a lot of different choices here when it comes to setting up these individual interfaces. All right, so device templates contain basically a device's complete operational configuration. You create device templates by consolidating together all of the different feature template configurations. Each device template is specific for a type of device, and then for that device type, if we have multiple devices that have the same configuration, we can use the same device template for those particular devices. For example, you might have a lot of different WEdge routers in your overlay network that have the same basic configuration, so you can configure them with the same templates. You could specify differences in the templates by using configuration variables, which can be included in, as part of our kind of unique or independent configuration for each of these different devices that we're deploying. If the configurations for the same type of devices are different, then in that case we would go ahead and create different device templates. So when it comes to device templates, if you recall, the device templates contain the device's complete operational configuration. We create the device templates by consolidating together all the individual feature templates that we've configured, whether it's a default system feature template or a new feature template that we've created. We can create those feature templates by entering them in a CLI text style configuration, or we can do it as a feature template in the vManage interface. We talked about those options before. Now we can only attach one device template configuration to configure a vManage NMS, so it has to contain at a minimum all the required portions of the vManage configuration if we're applying this to the vManage device. If it doesn't, the vManage NMS is going to give you an error message, and if you try to attach a second device template to the vManage NMS, it's going to overwrite whatever first one you applied. So what we're looking at this particular slide are all the system configuration parameters that you would see with the device template. Let me scroll right here a little bit and you can see what I'm talking about. If I go into the device model, I can specify the template name that I'm creating. This would be the device template itself, give it a description, and I have 4 areas that I can configure: basic information, transport and management VPN information, service VPN information, and additional templates that I want to apply. So things like AAA, like OMP, like BFD, like security, these are the templates that we talked about previously, the feature templates that we talked about previously, is something that we could apply. And then we have system information, and we have, which is the system, the default system information that we can apply, the logging template, and so on. So these are, if you go back to the previous lesson, you see all the details about these feature templates that we can apply to our basic information for the device template. You notice here some of these have the factory default, OMP factory default, AAA factory default, and so on. You also know the asterisk here indicates that this is a required field. So we go in and we can configure or associate all of these parameters: the host name of the device, the GPS location, the time zone, the AAA configuration, the logging, TACX and radius information, OMP information, S&MP configuration information, and security information, which, by the way, in this case, security could apply to both the DTLS tunnels and the IPsec tunnels. All right, now one of the other options that we have to do, is to apply transport and service VPN parameters. So it's kind of important in this case to talk about this segmentation. We'll have a section later on all about segmentation, but in the overlay network, the VPNs are what allow us to divide the network into different segments. And by default, 2 VPNs are present in the configuration on all of our Viptela devices. These VPNs serve a specific purpose in the topology. VPN 0 is a transport VPN. It's going to carry the control traffic over the DTLS or TLS connections between the vSmart controllers and the WEdge routers, and between vSmart controllers and the vBond orchestrators. So initially, VPN 0 contains all of the device interfaces except for those management interfaces, and all of those interfaces are disabled by default. For the control plane to establish itself so that the overlay network can function, you have to configure the WAN transport interfaces in VPN 0. VPN 512 is the management VPN. It carries all of the out-of-band network management traffic along, between the different Viptela devices in the overlay network. And VPN 512 is actually enabled by default. You can, of course, modify that configuration. Now, to segment user networks and user data traffic locally at each site, and to interconnect user sites across the overlay network, we create additional VPNs on the WEdge routers. These VPNs are identified as any VPN that's not 0 or not 512 within a specific range. To enable the flow of traffic, you associate interfaces with each VPN, assigning an IP address to those interfaces. And then those interfaces connect to the local site networks, not to the WAN transport clouds. So that means on the backside of the service side, not the WAN transport side of the fabric side. So for each of these VPNs, you can set up other interface specific properties, and that's where the feature templates come into play. We can configure features specific for user segments like BGP, OSPF routing, VRRP, QoS, and so on. Something that we'll talk about later on as we start to get into the actual implementation of the VPNs themselves. All right. So in this particular case, what we're seeing is, in essence, the transport and service parameters that we can apply to the device profile that we're going to apply to the individual devices. And like I said, VPN 0 has been identified. Now the tunnel interfaces, those are our DTLS and TLS WAN transport connections. Those are used to transport tunnel traffic and enable flow of control and data traffic to an interface. The service VPNs are those non-default VPNs, and then VPN 512 is our management VPN. So to create a device template, we simply go into the Devices tab, we clicked Create a Template, and then from that Create Template drop-down, we select from our feature templates. All right, we can see in this particular diagram, we've gone under Configuration, we've gone under Templates, and then we hit the plus sign up here to create a template. Now this is a device template, not a feature template. From here, we can select whether we're going to create the device template based on a CLI template or from a feature template. We can see some that are already created here, like for example, WEdge 8 backup. That was a CLI, a device template that was created from a CLI. And the device model that it's applied to is our WEdge Cloud. Right now, we don't have any feature templates applied to that, and there are presently no devices attached to that particular device template. Whereas the VRRP testing, we can see that this was a device template that was created from referencing feature templates. It's also the WEdge Cloud model, device model. We have 14 different feature templates applied to this device template, but it's not presently configured on any devices. Our basic template has 15 different feature templates referenced, and it's applied to 2 different devices in this particular case. All right. So you go in, you click from feature template or from CLI. We can't mix and match that. We have to choose one or the other. And then from the devices model drop-down, we select the type of device that we're creating the template for. All right, we can see that devices model option right here. We give it a name and a description, and then we can start applying each of these individual configurations. All right, anything that's going to have a required feature template is going to have an asterisk next to it. Anything that doesn't have an asterisk next to it is going to be an optional template. And then we can also see some of the factory default templates that are applied based on the outputs here. In the template name field, we give it the name of the device. That field is mandatory. Like I said, it can only contain uppercase or lowercase letters, 0 through 9, and we can also include hyphens and underscores, but it cannot contain any spaces, and it cannot contain any other characters. In the description field, we enter the description of the device template. That field is mandatory as well. And then if I want to view the factory default configuration for a feature template, I basically select the desired feature template and click View Template, and then I can click Cancel if I want to go back from that particular screen, right? So we can see here in our basic information, we have about 6 different templates that get applied: AAA, OMP, BFD, security, system, and logging. All right, now we can apply additional basic templates here, only 2 of them. We can add an archive template and we can add an NTP template as part of our basic information. When I go to the Transport Management VPN, VPN 0 is the only one that's there by default, but I have additional VPN 0 templates that I can create. An interface template, OSPF, BGP, and so on. All right, so we talked about a lot of these basic features, right? When we talked about the feature templates, now we're kind of just pulling all these things together to create this overall device profile. To create a custom template for a feature, we select the factory default feature template, and then we simply say create a template. And then the template form is going to be displayed. The top of the template form, like I said, contains the naming and the description. And then we have the desired fields and the values that we can set. So in this particular case, we see that actually it looks like we tried to create one here, and it said that a name was required. But when I click on this system dropdown, I can create a template directly from the device template configuration. When I say create a template here, I'm actually creating a feature template, or I can actually view the template that's applied, and I might even be able to change the settings of that template directly from here. So you might actually be able to kind of use the device template configuration screen to go back and start to create your additional templates that you might need for the device itself. All right. Now we also have our Transport Management VPN template. These would be the VPN 0 and VPN 512 specifically. So we click the Transport Management VPN tab. That's right below the description field. And then we can scroll down into the Transport Management VPN section. So this is right after the basic information. We scroll down and we can see this information. All right. Now what we're seeing in this particular case is essentially which interfaces these are going to be applied to. The basic VPN 0, We can add or delete individual interfaces. This particular device that we're provisioning is going to have 3 different interfaces. So we're adding, and this happens automatically, by the way, based on the model number, but we're basically adding VPN 0 to those interfaces. Remember, the transport VPN needs to be active on the interface in order for it to be able to establish DTLS and TLS tunnels to the vSmart controller. So you have to have all of the interfaces in the device. If I was to remove an interface, then that interface would not be able to establish a DTLS tunnel, and so on. And I can create additional VPN 0 templates if I want. And it depends. It depends on if I'm adding another interface, for example. So maybe there's a 4th or 5th interface I want to add. If I want to include some BGP configurations or OSPF configurations, if I'm setting up GRE or PPP, and so on. All right. We can also see the management interface here as well. Now, the Management VPN does not have to be applied to every single interface. In fact, it would really only be applied to the management interface of the device. And we can add VPN 512 to other interfaces if we want by clicking this plus symbol, and we can select the available interfaces from the drop-down. Again, this is based on the platform that we chose when we started creating the device template from the beginning. All right, so we can modify these configurations. The last thing that we see is the service VPN. We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's take a look at a couple of other options here, though, with the transport and management VPN, and then we'll get into the service VPN. So we see different parameters here. Some of them are required unless they're otherwise indicated. Things like the template name, the description, the VPN itself. Right? Is this in this particular case, this is a VPN 0, so we apply the VPN or specify the VPN. Are we doing ECMP keying? Are we going to specify DNS information for this particular feature? Are we going to put in an IP route, a GRE route and services? And then we can see also DNS information listed here. So in fact, we see trainingvbon.viptela.com, which is the 25.25.3.1 and 1.3.25.25 and 1.4.31.31. All right, so these are, again, additional features that you can apply. We'll either see them later on or we'll discuss them in another lesson as we start to get into more of the in-depth discussions on our implementations. But again, these are just individual features that we're going to apply, and it's important that you kind of get an understanding of what each of those features look like as you start to do these different configurations. All right. We also see in this case the additional transport VPN configurations. So this is the IP route where we have the option to configure static routes into a particular VPN. We can simply add additional routes by hitting the plus sign. This is the route prefix, and then we can specify the next hop, which, by the way, would be a TLOC address, right? Not a physical IP address. We can also specify different services. So in this particular case, we're actually identifying whether or not the VPN interface is going to be active or not, right? So we have the option here of specifying the configuration of the transport VPN on the WEdge router, which means we have to have at least one interface in VPN 0. Typically all of them would be, because they're going to be establishing tunnels, but at least one interface has to be in VPN 0, and that's what we're specifying in this case. Gig 01 is presently shut down, or actually not shut down in this case. Are we going to do static address? Are we going to do a DHCP address on this interface? And then we can also specify other configuration elements, right? Is NAT going to be running? Are we going to be running VRRP? Are we going to apply access control list to this interface, which can be applied inbound or outbound? Are we going to do some static ARP entries? And then we have some advanced configurations as well. Now we're going to apply an interface to a color, or apply a color to the interface. That's going to indicate what kind of transport it's connected to. Is it a tunnel interface? And what are the max number of connections? Is this a control connection? Meaning that, does it allow me to connect to my vSmart controller or is this just a tunnel interface that allows communication to other WEdge devices for data traffic and service VPNs? All right, we also have the 512. Now, VPN 512 is our management VPN. Not a whole lot to set up here. We can do some static routes and apply some services and so on. Again, it's a little bit beyond the scope of this particular lesson to get into each of these individual configuration details, but I promise we're going to see that as part of the later discussion. All right, the last thing we'll talk about here is the service VPN. Now, these are VPNs that exist that are not 0 and not 512. So VPNs 1 through 511 and VPNs 513 through 530. Service VPNs are basically our data VPNs that we're using to pass client traffic from one site to the other. So we would just click on the Service VPN tab, which is right below that description field, and then we can scroll down to the Service VPN section, and we can start configuring our Service VPN parameters. All right, so are we going to run a particular protocol on this interface? Is there a DHCP server? Are we applying what VPN interface that we've configured are we going to apply to this interface? And we can apply all kinds of different templates, right? Are we going to run multicast? Are we going to run IGMP snooping? Are we going to run protocol independent multicast? Is this going to be part of a GRE tunnel? Are we bridging this interface and so on? All right, and then we can create additional templates or apply banner templates and SNMP templates and policy templates to this particular interface. All right, so the basic configuration is pretty straightforward, right? Basic configuration allows us to go in and turn on or turn off an interface. And we're, in this case, again, able to do static configurations. The idea here is that we're still assigning this interface to a VPN, right? So this is the interface that's going to end up being assigned to VPN 1, which we created here, basic VPN 1, and now we're creating, if you go under the interface configuration, right, we can specify DNS information and so on, but we're also going to apply an interface to this VPN. In this case, it's going to be gig 00, and all of the specific elements, right, NAT and VRRP, ACL, etc., can be applied to this particular interface. We can also specify routing services if we want to run routing services. So from that VPN interface dropdown, we specify the VPN interface Ethernet template, which gives us the ability to set up properties like, what's the router ID for this particular device? This is a WEdge cloud device. That's what we started with in this case. What are the administrative distance values that we're applying to OSPF internal routes or inter-area routes? Those are my type 3 LSAs, my intra-area routes, my external routes, which are my type 5s and type 7 LSAs. I can apply static routing. I can set the maximum metric, the area ID, and so on for these basically all the details of the OSPF features. All right. So it gives me the ability to establish, in this case, and this might not apply to every single VPN that you're creating, right? But I can create an OSPF feature template to configure all of the OSPF parameters. And then those OSPF parameters can be used for service-side routing to provide reachability of networks on the local side of the network, right? So we have a template name, we have a description, we have the router ID, external, internal, etc. And then we can configure OSPF to advertise maybe a maximum metric so that we can say, so that other routes don't prefer this router as an intermediate hop in the SPF calculation that they're performing, and so on. All right. We also have the ability to configure additional parameters for the area. So we can specify the area that the interface is in. What is the area type? Is it a stub area? Is it a totally stubby area? Is it a not so stubby area? Is it totally not so stubby? And we can, basically configure all of the properties of the area. In the Advanced tab, we could do things like, oops, let me go back. In the Advanced tab, we could do things like default information originate. We can do redistribution into OSPF and so on. So there's a lot of different options that we have to manage these different templates. We didn't get into it in as much detail as we did when we went through the feature template section, but you can see it is an important aspect, these device templates. All right, so we'll get into the actual application later on and some more of the advanced topics that we go through, and we'll see some more of those details. So in this lesson, we talked about the configuration elements that are included in a device template, like system parameters, the transport and management VPNs, the service VPNs. We talked about the different system configuration parameters that include things like site ID, system IP, and host name, the transport and service VPN parameters that are used to configure the WAN connectivity and the service routing features. We talked about different device templates and how we can create the features and then apply those features to devices in our overlay network, which is 4 different elements, right? The basic information, the transport and management VPN information, which is VPN 0 and 512, and the service VPNs, which are the other ones outside of that, right? We also talked about applying different device templates to include things like AAA feature templates, OMP, system logging, BFD security, how we can use the transport and management VPN section of the device to configure interfaces and routing parameters so that we have our transport connections. And we can also apply those properties to our management VPN as well. And then we can use the service VPN section of the device template to configure service side parameters. Now remember, those are the parameters that are on the customer side, right? The end user facing side of our WEdge devices. And that would be things like enabling routing protocols and just general services for the VPN altogether. All right, so we'll wrap up this lesson. We'll see you guys in the next lesson.